You know, people have phrases stuck in their head from their childhood. Some things that we want to remember, some things we might not want to remember. I remember my dad often saying when I would be doing something out at the house, he would say, "Yeah, you left it out in the woods." I spent a lot of time outside, you know, no Xbox, no Game Boys, none of that stuff. And so I like to tinker with stuff. And he would always get so mad because I would leave his tools out in the woods and not put them back in the proper place. Because all of you know that there's a place for everything, and everything should be in its place. A lesson that somehow bypassed me in some way. And I think I'm still finding things up in Tobacconville that I left out in the woods. They're a lot more rustier than when I left them there. I remember my aunts and uncles and my mom, my grandmother too, used a phrase that she would use when we would be out with the cousins playing. And you may have heard it too. Some of you may even use it. Play pretty. I'm not sure exactly what that meant. It sounded good. Good alliteration, play pretty. I think it meant to behave ourselves, not pull out anyone's hair, not take anyone's toys, not poke anybody in their eyes and throw sand at them. So play pretty was another phrase. And perhaps a phrase that you heard maybe when you were a child, or maybe when you came back from doing stuff, and your parents came home and said, "Man, what a mess you made." Now, I'm not talking about a mess of salad that you might fix for supper, or a mess of beans you might put on the stove and cook for lunch. I'm talking about a hot mess, a hot mess of messes that you left out, that your parents or your grandparents might pick up. Well, I can almost hear Jesus saying those words today. When he enters the temple, looks around in the corridor, the portico out there where the Gentiles would hang out and the people would exchange product back and forth, and you could take this thing and buy it and sacrifice it here, or you could take that money that was profane and get some good money that would be good money to spend in the temple. And Jesus looked around and he saw those things, and he just kind of had one of those moments. He said, "Man, what a mess you have made to my temple." Seems kind of like an aha moment for Jesus, and can be somewhat of an aha moment for us as well. You see, Jesus had a very unique relationship with his temple. It wasn't the fact that he had only seen it once, he had seen it many times in his life. We remember those early stories about Jesus with his parents. You know, Jesus goes with mom and dad in the caravan, in the SUV, the camel SUV, go to Jerusalem, hang out with all those people. You know, but Jesus is kind of a different kind of child, so he goes to the temple. He talks with the big men about big things, about God things. And so he likes it so much that, you know, mom and dad are back in the SUV, got the Jeep cranked up, got it filled up with gas, and, you know, heading down the road, and says, "Hey, where's Jesus in the back seat?" "No, I haven't seen him." "Oh no, we got to go back." So they go back to the temple. Where do they find? Jesus with the learned men of the day talking about God things. And what does he say? Sorry, I missed you. No, he says, "I'm about my Father's business." Kind of a different response. Never used that one when I was growing up. I got some higher calling, Dad, Mom. That wouldn't have worked for me. But for Jesus, it did work. They knew from the beginning that Jesus was a different sort of child. And we find in John's gospel, Jesus is coming back to Jerusalem. Now, interesting to note, for those of you who follow such things, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, have the time when Jesus comes to the temple to clean house at the end of his life. It's that last week, and we'll hear it in our readings from Holy Week. But John has it in a different place. Good old John, he's always a little bit different. And he has it at the beginning, after the miracle in Cana. So we could surmise that perhaps both Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all correct. That Jesus has come to the temple at least once when a child, and maybe several times, he's come to the temple because it is his Father's house. And now he's come back to the temple again, and he sees this mess that they have made of this place. Now Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about Jesus' reaction as, "You have made it into a den of robbers." That sounds really exciting. You know, he comes in there and they're just taking advantage of everybody. And Jesus has just had enough. He's just had enough, and he sees what they have done to profane the house of God. They're taking extortionary methods to take money from people who have very little and tax them again. Rome was always taxing them. Now they're being taxed by the temple. And you've compounded that. You're selling way too much stuff for way too high prices, and you're a den of robbers here. John has a little different flavor to it. He talks about it in somewhat a different way. Let me look at that again. He says, he made a whip of cords, and he drove them all out. He says, "Take these things away. You should not make my Father's house a house of trade." So it's not exactly the same thing, but there's the same kind of intent there. He's aware that maybe there should be a higher calling for his house than just trade or commerce or just the selling and buying of things. He realized that the Gentiles and the Jews, all people everywhere, will eventually be coming to this place as a place of prayer for all people. And so he drives them out. He turns the tables over, and he makes sure that they understand that the ways of humanity are much different than the ways of God. He wants to make sure they understand that we have a part to play in what God has done in our world. So Jesus is with his disciples, and he again predicts again that he will have to die. His temple will be raised up again, predicting his own death, his own body being the temple. And he makes clear that this temple that is his body will be given for the salvation of all people everywhere. Now it seems to me very interesting that Jesus uses this metaphor of the temple. We know the Gospel of John again, at the beginning, Jesus says, according to the Gospel of John, that he will tabernacle with his people. He will dwell with his people, and it'll be the place where God's Spirit is at, indicating that Jesus is truly God's Son. He will be tabernacled with humanity. And now he talks about this same temple, his body, being connected to the sacrifice of his life for the sins and the demands of righteousness. He's willing to put it all on the line. So we see the intent, we see the sacrifice, we see God's mind, and we understand that God is providing for us a way of retrieving our right relationship with him. But there's something else in this story that kind of hits me when I think about it. Jesus is talking about the way in which we have a part to play in changing the outcome of situations. We have a part to play. No, we do not change money here at Bethania. We do not sell things like pigeons or doves or other sacrificial items. But all of us, within our own scope of influence, sometimes put the emphasis on the wrong thing in life. As my old friend used to say, we put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. We don't quite get it right. So Lent is a perfect time to redirect our emphasis, redirect our thoughts about what's important in life. How do we live this life of faith in this world? It's a good time to reflect upon what we do as Christians, how we relate to other people, and how we act, and what's really important in our life. It's not that the people of Jesus' day were doing something inherently bad. There was a sacrificial code. There was ways to incorporate one's life within the temple. There was a way to live out one's faith through sacrifice. It was all prescribed by law. It wasn't like they were horribly doing something terrible. They were just acting on these guidelines. But I think what Jesus is trying to tell us through this story today is that the emphasis is all wrong. They didn't see the purpose of the sacrifice. They didn't see the purpose of their living in a relationship with God. They failed to see there was a deeper, more meaningful relational purpose involved. You know, Jesus, when he talks to the woman at the well, and he talks to this lady, and she wants to know, what's the way that we should worship God? She had heard that, according to John's Gospel, that you should worship God at a holy place like Jerusalem. But she said other people say it's out there somewhere, another location. And Jesus responds to her question with a very profound statement. There will be a time coming, Jesus says, according to John's Gospel, where the worship of God is a worship that demands heart and soul and body in full function. It's not at a place. It's not just in a church. It's not just in a temple. It's in a heart deeply devoted to God. The emphasis sometimes in my life has been the trappings of faith and what I have as my perceptive role in life. But Jesus doesn't want that. He wants us to live out of a heartfelt faith that comes from within and allows people to see Christ in us. That right relationship with God is what Jesus is talking about when I think he cleans out the temple. I don't think he's necessarily just mad at people, but he wants people to understand that our relationship with God is always the primary focus of a faith-lived life. So Jesus reminds us during this season of Lent to get our heart right, to get our minds right, to get our way of living right. Put our actions and our words together so they're congruent and they live out what we believe to be true in life. You may have saw in the paper this week, over the weekend, that Jimmy Newsom, who was the former pastor of King and the father of the other Jimmy Newsom, who was the pastor of King, died. And I remember going to a vacation Bible school at King Moravian with my friend Keith Petrie. And Keith and his family were members at Mizpah. Mizpah was much like, members of King. Mizpah was much like King, and it was a smaller church, so you know the deal. During vacation Bible school, your parents saw an opportunity, they seized it. Oh, you're going to vacation Bible school here this week. Way to go, Mom. And you're going here the next week. No. And then you're going here. They kind of make sure that you are farmed out at different locations throughout the summer. You know, and as a child, we just saw this as great. You know, this is wonderful. And as the parents are saying, thank God from whom all blessings flow. Vacation Bible school has come again, and we are free at last. So anyway, we'd go to King, and Jimmy Newsom Jr. was a high schooler at that time. Show how ancient I am. And he was playing handball up in the attic at the King Moravian. And but I remember going up to King Moravian, and Jimmy was the pastor, James, or Big Jim as we call him now. And he was up there, and one of the crafts that we had at Vacation Bible School was a plaster Paris. How many people made this? Praying hands. How many people have any plaster Paris praying hands at home from Vacation Bible School? You've seen them having it. That was the thing that you did with kids in those days. You took plaster Paris and you put them in a mold, and you got the mold out, and then you would paint it. And there were the praying hands. And I still have those praying hands in the house in Tobacco somewhere. I'm not sure where, but I'm sure I could find them if I dug around just a little bit. And I remember as a child thinking, well, this is kind of odd, got these praying hands. Who did I give it to? So I gave it to my stepmother. Here's a gift. Put it, and I think it's still in the bookcase here. But looking back on it as an adult, I remember that perhaps the lesson there for the Vacation Bible School that year was that prayer was a good thing. That to pray to God was a good thing. It was a replica of the picture that used to be here. I don't know if you remember that. There used to be a picture of Jesus praying here above the pulpit at one time. And for me, that's a kind of a great image to think about this story in John's Gospel. Jesus is reminding us again of that vertical